When I'm sailing and cruising through remote tropical areas, it's incredibly important that I have a solid and reliable dinghy, one that can handle it all. Everything from going to get groceries and doing laundry in town, to sending it out far on a spearfishing mission, getting out to the best surf breaks, or taking those long treks to deserted islands. The right dinghy setup makes all the difference. It needs to be fast, safe, nimble, and of course fun. This is my way to get out and explore these shallow, hard to reach, and often treacherous areas my deep draft sailboat simply cannot go to. I like to think of my sailboat as the house I live in and my dinghy as the car I drive. But like cars on the road, there are endless types of dinghies and their configuration. So what I've done here is made a complete breakdown of my own dinghy, what it's set up with, and what its capabilities are. Let's dive on in. Alright, so obviously the dinghy itself is hands down the most important part of this entire setup. For me, the Highfield 310 was an obvious choice for a number of reasons. I broke down 7 categories that'll explain why this is the perfect dinghy for all my purposes. The first and most important category I chose is weight. If the dinghy weighs too much, I can't lift it up on the dinghy davits, I can't pull it up onto the beach. It's kind of useless to my purposes for that. So the weight of this dinghy is 137 pounds or 62 kilograms. It's actually lighter than my previous dinghy. I don't know how, but that's very important right there. Not just the entire weight though that's important, but also how it lifts on my dinghy davits. The lift points being right here in the back, close to the engine, is important, but then this one here that actually goes a little bit further back. My previous dinghy, the lift point was all the way in the bow, which was actually closer to being up here. So that meant even more weight was centered down the back. For me, trying to lift all this up by myself, whenever I had to lift up the back of the dinghy, it was probably 3 or 4 times as much weight as it would be up on the front. Now as well, the fuel tank is also up in the front, so we've further spaced out more weight to the front to better balance the dinghy itself. This makes it much easier whenever I'm trying to lift it, or if I have somebody else to help me with it, we both end up lifting at the same point. So number 1, the weight, check. All right, the second most important category I decided to pick out would be length. Now, if the dinghy is too long, it won't fit on the dinghy davits of the back of my boat. It'll stick out, and when I go to dock my boat, it'll hit a pylon, it'll scrape, it'll pop, it'll hold my boat up, nothing good will happen. So the dinghy can't be too long. It also can't be too short because it's gotta be able to have myself, friends, and a bunch of stuff in it. This dinghy, like the model name, the Highfield 310, is 3.1 meters long. That's 10 feet 2 inches. Now 10 feet 2 inches I found to be perfect since I've had this. Not just because it perfectly fits behind the beam of my boat as I come into dock, but also you've got to be able to go into waves. And if your dinghy is too short and you go to hit waves, it's gonna flip it up. I mean, you could flip completely back, but it's just gonna make for an uncomfortable ride. So for the length category, this one hits the mark perfectly. Check. The third category I find to be the most important is safety. I don't want anybody falling out or anybody getting injured. Like I said before, this dinghy is able to handle the waves perfectly, meaning nobody's gonna get bounced out. Also, when it comes to flotation, which is pretty much the safest thing you can be out here, being that this is a rigid inflatable boat, you have these tubes that are filled with air, so even if this thing flips or is completely filled with water, it will float no matter what. It's very important. But the great thing about this being a rib is it's not just the inflation that you get from these side tubes, but the hard aluminum bottom that you get from the rigid part of it. That way, if I do hit something hard out there in the ocean, it's not gonna deform or bend this thing at all. I've dragged this thing up on the rocks and it's totally fine. So for my third category, safety, check. All right, the fourth category I've got is power. Obviously, the engine is very important, and we'll talk about that in a later section, but really it's what can the dinghy handle for power. Some dinghies are only rated for like 5 horsepower. Not enough. I need to be able to have at least 15, which is what I have, and that is wonderful, but that means the transom has to be strong enough to support that. This dinghy is able to handle 20 horsepower, which would be more than enough for what I do. So for the number 4 category of power, check. Number 5 is handling. I gotta have a dinghy that can maneuver quickly and efficiently, not only out in the open ocean, but when I'm coming up to docks or especially my sailboat. I've seen dinghies that aren't very maneuverable as they try to approach a sailboat. It's kind of funny to watch. In particular, they'll either miss the boat and have to circle back around, which can be frustrating, or they'll hit the boat in an attempt to try to tie on, which you really don't want. This dinghy, I don't know what I can say, it just handles very well. I think because the tubes are a bit shorter in the back, which does help with the overall length, I think that makes it able to scoot a little bit better. And if you're good on the engine and the tiller, you're able to maneuver very easily in and out of tight spaces. As you can see here, I was able to maneuver in and out of a cave in pretty difficult conditions, so I think that speaks a lot about it. So for number 5, handling, this dinghy gets the check. Number 6 is space. It's a bit different than length because you could have a very long or even a very short dinghy and still get a lot of useful space out of it, which is actually true in this case. My previous dinghy was closer to 11 feet versus this one is 10 feet 2 inches, but I actually get much more useful space out of this. And that useful space comes from a few different reasons. One, my fuel tank is up here in the bow locker, which I'll talk about later, and I absolutely love this addition. It makes a huge, huge impact on the way I'm able to cruise and use this dinghy. Having the fuel tank up here means I'm saving all this space inside here versus my last dinghy, it would just be loose in the center, which also isn't very safe. As well, having this bag here helps me out quite a bit. And just this section right here is great for throwing things in that I'm gonna be using throughout the day if it's only me and 1 or 2 or even 3 other people. You also need to have enough space for yourself and all of your friends. This dinghy is rated for up to 5 people or 1,200 pounds, which I think is like 550 kilograms. Now that's a lot. So actually dividing it out, that would be more like 8 people that you could have in here, which to be fair, you could easily do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 in here. Now, you're not gonna plane, and it's definitely not good to do in any sort of rough conditions, but the fact that this dinghy has good space for that many people is very important. So for number 6 space, this dinghy gets the check. All right, number 7, my last category here is accessibility. How easily can you get in and out of the dinghy in all conditions? Let's start out with the most important one, which is getting in and out of your dinghy to your sailboat. Now, I really didn't like it at first, especially the look of this flat bow, and I'd seen it for a while on other dinghies, and it just never looked very boat-like to me. And I kind of wondered why it was like this until I got the thing and I realized, oh my gosh, this is amazing. The reason for this is so you can butt it square up to a dock or a swim platform, which whenever I'm going out somewhere and I just need to drop somebody off real quick, or maybe it's the first person, they stand up here on the bow locker, maybe their knee is here on the tube. As soon as we bump up against the dock or the swim platform, they jump off holding the bow line in hand, and there we go. We're on to whatever we need to be. Another thing that really helps accessibility of this dinghy is just the tubes themselves. Being able to pull up against literally any surface, any structure, any sort of material is really useful. Because of this side rub chafe kind of bounce guard they have here that doesn't affect the tube, you can really butt up against it, and then this whole tube is actually kind of flat on top, and these sections here are really made to be stood on. You can also stand there or obviously up here, but usually when I'm coming on and off the dinghy to my boat, especially from the side, I'm just gonna stand on the tube itself. And the last part of accessibility that's really important to me is getting in and out from the water to the dinghy. Now, I've already done quite a bit of free diving from this dinghy platform, and obviously having owned a rib in the past, I know how easy it is. But with this high field, they put all these straps here in really good places, especially this one. So whenever I'm trying to come up onto the dinghy, it's very easy for me to just grab these two and pull myself in. Many other dinghies that are just rigid all around, they just have one singular side to come up around. That's not very easy when it comes actually pulling yourself up onto it. Now, I know this list might sound really easy to check off, and 1 or 2 of them is for pretty much any other dinghy, you could say the same thing. But to get all 7 of these and to do them as well, it's actually pretty rare and pretty hard to do. Like I said before, I sought out this particular dinghy model, and I had been for years. Due to COVID and shipping errors, they were completely sold out when I did have to make a dinghy purchase. I think it was 2 or 3 years back. But now that they were finally back in stock, I was able to get the 310 model, and I've just been very happy with it. Now, there are a few other features about the 310 that I really like that don't really fit into any of those other categories, but they do kind of help and contribute. First things first is you'll notice the floor is pretty flat in here. My last dinghy just kind of was like, you know, a bowed shape. It just held the full shape of the rib. But this instead has what's known as a double baffled floor. This is good, really, I would say, for 2 or 3 reasons. First thing being is it keeps my feet dry. You basically have a little bilge that's underneath the entire floorboards here. And then when you want to drain it, you just pop this out and the water will drain as you're going. Now, I really enjoy being able to keep my feet dry, and honestly, it was just kind of a pain before. Anytime you'd have anything on the floor here, it would get wet, it would get disgusting, and you really wouldn't have anywhere to put it. It was really kind of a pain. Like I said before in the intro, this is like my car, and imagine not being able to put anything down in your car. No cup holders, no nothing. It would get pretty annoying, so I really like that feature. The other thing that's good about this is the stability. when I'm just kind of cruising along slowly, or even when I'm going a bit quicker, I can stand up on this, and it's super stable because it's this nice, perfectly flat surface. It's not angled on either side for my feet to try to adapt to. All right, another fairly subtle but really important feature that the 310 has is this bow locker. Again, I wasn't a huge fan when I first got it, but it took me the better part of an hour to realize the value of this. It's a seat, which is really nice. It's a place up high I can put gear if I want to, which is really nice. It better distributes weight further forward, which I really enjoy. Being able to use it as a step to get on and off is huge. And then obviously probably the main thing is just how much stuff I can put in here. I always keep it locked with a stainless steel padlock. A bit of security is good. I doubt anybody wants to get in here, but I'm just keeping people honest. So up here you can see the amount of space, which obviously is big enough to fit my 5-gallon fuel tank. The space in this thing is actually pretty impressive. Most of it is obviously taken up by the 5-gallon fuel tank, which is fine. That also puts quite a bit of weight much further forward in the dinghy. So when you go to take off and get up on the plane, it helps out a lot, especially if it's just one person. You find it levels out so much easier and so much nicer. And even while you're going, it just seems to handle better. Now, as well as the fuel tank up here, the fuel line then goes down and goes in between the double baffled floor all the way to the back. So I'm never stepping on my fuel lines. Somehow I never managed to break the fuel lines on my last dinghy, but I was always really worried about it, and it nearly happened a bunch of times. As well, up here I keep my anchor, which is collapsible, with some of this awesome high visible floating chafe resistant line that I got nearby here at Island Waterworld. I'll talk more about that later. As well, I keep some extra rope up here. A lot of times I'll keep my water shoes, but I've got those on right now. Or really anything else I want up here. It's also cool just knowing that I can lock something on this. Again, imagine you couldn't lock your car and you have to leave it completely open to where people walk past it. Feels kind of weird. So I feel like maybe what I'm making a video about here is that this dinghy is more like a car than most other dinghies that are just a dinghy. And the last feature I want to talk about on this that's definitely subtle but highly overlooked is the straps they put on here. Now the straps, you know, they seem like they're really good quality and blah, 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 but it's the positioning that they put them on. Again, I really liked my last dinghy. It wasn't a bad dinghy, but my first strap was like here, almost where I sat. So it was always a super awkward angle. On this one, my right hand is always locked into here. My left hand is always on the tiller, and it just feels really secure. If I want to, I can also grab this between my legs, or I could shift this back to here so that way I'm steering from the center. Now, I always prefer doing my dinghy this way. I think being on the side of the tube is really good. It makes me really mobile if I need to be. But again, these straps being here to always support me or other people up in the front are really important and make a huge difference. All right, now that we've talked about the dinghy itself, let's break down into some of the other things I have on here. The motor being the second most important. This is the Yamaha Enduro 15 horsepower 2-stroke engine with the side shifter model. There's 2 different models. I prefer the one that shifts on the side. I forget how the other one works, but not important. Now, the Yamaha Enduro, obviously because it's a 2-stroke, you can no longer get this in the US. I bought this in the Bahamas, I think 2 years ago. I haven't changed anything on it, but I definitely need to. Like, I could probably change the propeller out. Long story short, this is the most produced and best dinghy motor that there is. I don't think anybody doubts that. Now, obviously, I think this is the best dinghy, but you know what? People can doubt that. People can have other opinions. That's fine. When it comes to the motor, though, it just doesn't get any better than this thing. It's a 2-stroke, so it's damn near bulletproof. The only time this engine didn't really work for me was because I gummed up one of the spark plugs from doing too much surfing on it. Oh yeah, that's right too, by the way. I can easily have 2 people in the dinghy and be towing somebody doing surfing behind the boat, which is so much fun. So to give you a few stats on this thing and this whole system in general, I do recommend watching my full video of when I went around the entire island of St. Martin. Check the link in the description below. It's a really good video, pretty long, but I go through a lot of adventures. It's really just putting this whole rig to the test. But the main thing I was actually very curious about when I did that was how much fuel does this thing use up and how fast does it go? So I calculated my distance and I think I ended up with about 42 nautical miles. In 42 nautical miles, I used up almost exactly 5 gallons of fuel. Now, because it's a 2-stroke, that's going to be gasoline and a 2-stroke mixture. So that is one of the downsides of this engine, is it's not as clean burning as a 4-stroke. But the upside of it is it's much smaller and much lighter than the 4-strokes. As well, and I'm not much of a mechanic myself, but I can say, and every other sailor can say, that a 2-stroke is far more reliable than a 4-stroke. this thing just starts every single time. It weighs 83 pounds, or I think that's 38 kilograms. It can get me and up to 3 other people, so 4 people total up on plane. Obviously I can surf behind it. I think I can go a max speed of about 25 knots, maybe a little bit less. And I found when I was cruising around the entire island of St. Martin, I usually averaged about 17 knots. So all around, it's just a great motor. There's really no ifs, ands, or buts about this one. But if something does go wrong, this thing's super easy to fix. You know everybody else around you that's cruising is gonna have parts for it or know somebody who can. If you drop this thing deep down into the salt water, well, you pull it back up, you flush it with some fresh water, you give the pull start a few cranks to get all the salt water out of there, and it'll just start back up. It's not at all like a 4-stroke that would need to be pretty much rebuilt in order to get it working again. But obviously, although this is the most produced and most used dinghy, there is a few cons to it. The first con is because it's so good, everybody wants it. So you really have to get yourself a good motor lock. I've got this nice stainless steel thing. Honestly, if you want to get this thing off of here, you're gonna need some serious hardware. You're gonna have to make some noise, you know, send some sparks out. It's gonna be a big inconvenience. It's possible, but you're gonna damage probably even the motor itself just trying to get it off of there, which is good because, like I said, this motor's so good, so recognizable, so widely used. Everybody wants it, and you gotta be a little careful. Other downsides to it, I would say, is it is fairly loud compared to a 4-stroke, so that's a little bit of a downside. It does pollute more, which I'm not a big fan of. If I could, I would just have an electric motor, but the difference between an electric motor's capability right now and this thing is just light years different. The technology is simply not there. When it is there, you guys can bet I'll be the first one to get a planing dinghy motor that's electric, but until then, I gotta stick with this. So it really doesn't matter what dinghy you get. By far the best motor you can have for it is this one. I'm not sponsored by Yamaha or anything like that. I would love to be, but it's just kind of the truth. All right, now that we have the 2 biggest basics, the dinghy and the motor itself, let's go into some of the other things that go into making this the ultimate adventure dinghy setup. The nuances, the small bits of gear that really make the difference. But remember, you guys, it's not just what you get, it's the quality of what you get, and it's also where in the dinghy you keep it. That all makes a huge difference. Let's dive in. All right, the first thing that's most important here is the fuel tank and its positioning and how I have it in here. Obviously it's far forward, so it's putting more of the weight further up, which is good. But also you'll notice this strap here that Highfield puts into the bow locker. This is really important because, as you'll see from some of my videos, I like to get airborne off the back of waves. And even if you don't like to do that, it'll still happen eventually. If you don't have this thing locked down, it's gonna bang around. If you're able to bash this and break something like right here off, you've got serious problems until you can basically get a new one. It's not really a very fixable thing. So having this locked down, having this far forward, and I think too, having this in the shade, so that way the sun's not directly on it, I think that makes a huge difference. The next item that's really important is my anchoring setup. I keep it all up here, stacked away, ready to be used. So here it is laid out. We've got this claw style anchor that folds down. It only takes a quick second to do this, and then it uses its own shackle to lock itself in place so it can't fold down. Now, this is not considered to be the best dinghy anchor style, at least. Most people prefer to go with sort of a Danforth style anchor. I don't, because I want it to be able to collapse down and be stowed away. And honestly, personally, as I'm doing my adventures, usually I swim down and I tie my dinghy off to something. I don't usually use an anchor, because I just don't find many dinghy anchors really work all that well. But if I do have to anchor, this is what I'm gonna use. After the anchor itself, then I've got a stainless steel shackle to hold on this galvanized chain. This chain will help hold the back of the anchor down so it actually digs in and stays down. As well, this weight really adds to keeping everything in place. Next, I have that same high visibility floating line with chafe protection. This stuff was great. Again, I got all this at Island Water World. And if you are going to try to replicate some of this gear, you really want to make sure you get high quality stuff. So don't go to Walmart to get this kind of stuff. You want to go to a good chandlery store. Here on St. Martin, Island Water World had everything that I needed very easily. And I'm sure I can make a whole video dedicated to just being able to go into a good chandlery store and see everything that they have there. All right, next, let's dive into what I keep in this bench bag here. This thing's great. I can store so much in it. Big zipper compartment here opens up. I've got so much in here. Keeping a spare fuel jug on board is really important, especially considering that my main fuel tank is up here in this locked box. means I'm kind of lazy and I don't check it every single day. I kind of know where it's at and I usually am not going very far. But really, if I run out due to my absent-mindedness, it's really good to know that I have that spare fuel jug that I can add to it. And again, keeping it right here, upright in the shade, is also really important. Remember, it's not just what you keep on board, but where you keep it. If you put it in the wrong place, it's gonna get damaged, lost, maybe stolen. You just don't want any of that. Next up would be the dinghy pump. Now, because it is a rigid hull inflatable, you do have the one downside, obviously, of, hey, what if it gets a hole and it pops? Now, the Highfield 310 is made out of Hypalon, which is really tough to pop. I've had this thing now for, I think, 2 or 3 months, and I haven't tried to pump it up once because it's just held that pressure perfectly fine. But if it does get a puncture in it, inside this bag, which Highfield sends you with the dinghy, you're gonna have your pump, you're also gonna have a repair kit. Both of those are very important, just in case. Next up that's really important are the oars. Now, I know I said that this dinghy motor is bulletproof and that I have a fuel jug and still my spare fuel jug, but sometimes you still find a way to, well, yeah, let's just say the other day I had to actually use my oars. Now, the oars are great on this one because they stow in here with a little Velcro and up there, and you see they're here nicely on the sides, so they're well out of the way. I never have to worry about them. On my last dinghy, there wasn't really a good place to put them, and I'll be honest with you guys, no matter how good your dinghy is, you always keep oars on board. It's just that simple, because as soon as you get in a situation where like, oh hey, you know, the motor got fouled, the propeller hit something, who knows what happened, you need to be able to row, and this dinghy actually rows really well. And as I found from when I first got it, I tried to row it without the dinghy motor on there, and the thing just kind of went squirrely, but with the motor, it tracks really, really well. So these oars are super important to keep on board. This is my little tool bag that I keep. Again, it came with the dinghy from Highfield. I keep some extra spark plugs in here, as well as I keep sunblock, a multi-tool, very important. And then this is a little tool bag. This little tool bag, it's a bit rusty, but it's got all the basic tools I need to work on the engine, especially a spark plug wrench. I think that's probably the most important, considering it's the only thing that's ever gone wrong on this dinghy. Again, here's where I keep my pump and any puncture stuff. Next thing I keep in here, a big bottle of water. You don't want to get stranded out someplace and be thirsty. I mean, you can see right now I'm trying to cover up as much as possible because it is hot here. We're in the Caribbean, you guys. Next up, I've got my dive light in here, and this thing is super bright. Well, it's brighter at night, but this being a dive light means it's waterproof and pretty much anything proof. It's just really useful. You get stuck out somewhere at night, start flashing a nearby boat 3 times. Repetitions of 3 means SOS, SOS. You just keep doing that, somebody should come over to you. And last thing I keep in here is just a few flares. Now those flares are actually expired. I don't have to keep them in here, but I just do it anyway because, well, I've got them. I might as well have them there. So you can see how much fits right in there without me even trying. And then in this closed patch here, I keep a buff, which also doubles as my mask if I need to, if we go back to COVID regulations and restrictions. I hope not. But it's also really good to just keep the sun off of me, so that's ready to go. More sunblock, some string, because you never know, a handy dandy knife, and this little whistle. Not all of that is entirely essential, but it fits into a nice little spot here and I don't have to worry about it. All right, now the last bit of stuff I keep on the boat is all for the security of the dinghy itself. Now when I was in the Bahamas, with the exception of Nassau, I never had to worry about my dinghy being stolen. But here in the Caribbean, it is a concern. You leave it someplace in the wrong place overnight, somebody might take your motor or the whole dinghy itself, which obviously would be terrible. St. Martin I find to be very safe. I haven't heard of anybody getting their dinghy stolen since I've been here, although I have heard of it happening in general. So to prevent that, I have this nice stainless steel cable lock. This also has a big stainless steel padlock on it. This would be a serious struggle for somebody to get through. And then that all locks into my dinghy motor lock here with this nice stainless steel one. So now I'm keeping my dinghy and my motor locked up safe and secure. Most places you go to will have a cleat that has a hole through the center of it and you can put it through there and lock it onto it. It's just one of those things, depending on where you are, if you don't know the place, you should probably do it. All right, this is the last thing that always is in my dinghy, is my dinghy lift points. This is just a simple stainless steel, high quality ring that I keep here. Now I also have these carabiners on it. The reason I have carabiners back here is I like to take these off, put them here. And that gives me a yoke so I can do surfing behind the boat or wakeboarding. I know it's not the most important thing, but it just makes it very versatile, very quickly, very easily. As well, I then have my lift point up here in the front, and again, a nice high quality stainless steel ring that I can clip into. I can't stress this enough, guys. If you go with a low quality thing from a low quality store, you're gonna get low quality results. Because it's high quality stainless steel, that thing's never gonna rust on me pretty much. If I went with a cheaper one, it would rust almost instantly out here, and then you have these big rust stains running through everything. And when that rust hits the rest of the boat, it's gonna start chipping the paint, peeling the paint, more rust. So I find that these few things you spend just a little bit more money on make a big difference. I almost forgot this last one. This is my bow line. You can see this bow line here is chafe resistant. I've got a simple bowline up front, and this thing is just always on there. There's really not too much more to it. Now, I could change it so I've got something hard, like a hard shackle up in the front, but generally you wanna go soft to hard. That way you don't have any chafe or rubbing against either of them. When I go up to my dinghy, I usually have a bungee that holds onto it. Otherwise, I would say this thing's probably about, looks like it's about 15 feet long. And that's perfect. I don't want it too long because every time I hop in the dinghy, I'm gonna throw it here into this chamber, and I'm gonna sit here and dinghy away. Now, when I pull up to docks, I've got my own way to disembark from the boat that I find is very quick. I'll have the boat in gear, in idle, with this around my wrist and the bow line in my hand. Just before I come to the dinghy dock, I'll jump off, and you see how I'm pulling my safety leash with me? That kills the motor, and just as I get to the dock itself, I kind of kick back and kick forward, pushing the dinghy away so I never hit the dock, but then I'm holding the bow line so I'm ready to go and tie it on. Not only is it quick and efficient, but you look super cool if you do it right. And that's what's important, right? So that is the complete list of everything I keep in the dinghy every day. It doesn't ever come out, it's always in there, ready to go, because I want to know that I can mostly just take off and go for most any adventure. But that's not everything that I keep in here. There's still other things I'm going to throw in here depending on the day. Mask and snorkel, maybe a special pair of shoes. I do recommend leaving your sandals in the dinghy because when I first started sailing and cruising, I would get all the way to the land and I'd be barefoot. And it's kind of embarrassing, and it's kind of the mark of a newbie sailor. But when I do go out on a serious adventure, maybe I'm spearfishing or going kiteboarding, doing some free climbing, surfing, anything that has any sort of potential hazard involved, I always am sure to bring this with me. This is my dinghy safety box. Kind of built it myself. It was some sort of a GoPro hard case, and then I just added a few things to it. It's waterproof, so I can keep whatever I want to in there, but here's some essentials I really recommend that you guys put together for your own dinghy. First off, we've got a handheld VHF. This has saved my bacon once before when I was sort of stranded on an island because a crew member popped the dinghy motor off with a lock on there. It was pretty impressive. So it's good to have that. I always have this towards the front. 10 points if you know what it is. 3, 2, 1, nope. This is a tourniquet. This in case in the potentially likely situation I get bitten by a shark while I'm doing something fun. I'm gonna throw this onto my arm, tighten it up, or I always teach my crew members how to use one of these. Either way, loss of blood isn't something you can get back immediately when you're out there on an emergency, so it's good to be ready for it. Next up, I have an old but still working ACR. This ACR has a GPS on it, so if I get in a really bad trouble, I'm gonna pop this thing up, I'm gonna hit it, and it's gonna relay to a satellite saying that I'm in trouble and where to come get me. Very important, and I'm happy I've never even come close to having to use this. I've got a signaling mirror, a way to start a fire. Looks like I got a little compass in here, that's cool. I keep this pair of trauma shears that I absolutely love. These things, I was in South Africa one time and I cut through a car door, part of a car door, to pull a kid out after a really bad car crash. So these can do quite a bit. As well, I was just using these the other day to cut up my mainsail, so they will go through anything. I've cut pennies in half with this. They're just a great pair. Last thing here is this medical kit. I'm not gonna open it up because really that could be a video in and of itself. Same car accident actually I used this to help save a couple people, and it really does make a big difference. You wanna make sure you've got even just the basics on there, some gauze, some Band-Aids, whatever. There's a lot in here, sterile gloves, bandages, I could go on and on. So I do recommend having a good medical kit. And again, this all packs right away into here, so I don't have to worry about where it is when I go off on an adventure, because I want to know that this thing is just ready to go and I don't have to start packing individual things. Because this is a hard case too, I can throw it at the bottom of all of my gear and I don't have to worry about water or oil or anything getting on it. But this box does not go with me every day because it's just too juicy of a thing for somebody to just grab right out of here. So usually it stays on my boat until I go out for a real adventure. All right, now that you know what I've got here for gear, let's go over the big one, cost. What is all of this cost? Well, first up, the dinghy itself, the Highfield 310, varies in price. Highfield is just a company, they don't sell directly, sort of like you can't buy a car directly from Ford, you have to go to a dealership. I got mine here in St. Martin at Island Water World. They had a whole range of selection of dinghies to choose from, but like I said, the 310 was the perfect one for my boat. If you haven't yet, check out my full boat tour video, and you can see if this would be the right dinghy size for yours. If you've got a smaller boat, I'd recommend just going a little bit smaller, or if you've got a bigger boat, just a little bit bigger. Really, you want the biggest dinghy that your boat can support. So the Highfield dinghy varies in price, like I said, depending on especially when you get it. If it's the high season where you're at, you're probably gonna pay a bit more. If it's at the low season, you get it for a bit less. So the Highfield dinghy costs anywhere between $5,300 to $6,000. And it can probably cost more than that if you're someplace like Fort Lauderdale. I got this dinghy for about $5,800, so kind of a bit there in the middle. The Yamaha Enduro 15 horsepower goes for about $2,700, and again, depending on the season where you're at, maybe they want to get rid of some stock, you could get it for a bit cheaper. The dinghy motor is going to come with the fuel tank, so you're set there. Then there is the anchoring system I've got up there. Those components together that I got at Island Water World, those cost me about $100, $120 or so. The kit that I keep here that I bring for all my adventures, now those components can get a bit pricey, so especially with the EPIRB unit, the little personal satellite locator beacon, that's really your bigger ticket that's in there. But all in all, you're looking at about $500 for what I keep in there. But you don't need that, you know, extra satellite finding thing. You could go with just the basics there and the box, and you could probably do that for $150. That's what I'd recommend for most of you. You don't need it to be all that big and expensive. The tools that I keep in here were about $100. Some of those came with the dinghy, some of those came with the motor itself, and some of them I bought. So I'm only looking at about $100 extra there. The high quality stainless steel components for my lift points, looking at about 20 bucks. Not really too big right there, but obviously you need it. The stainless steel cable with the covering on it, the padlock, that padlock, and then my dinghy motor lock. All those together do add up. You're looking at about $150 to $200 for all of that right there. So all things totaled, you're looking at about $9,300 for this whole setup you see right here. And that might sound like a lot, because it is. That's actually quite a bit. Now, I started out with a terrible dinghy that came with my sailboat that had an inflatable floorboard, and it would go like this across the water. Then I found a dinghy in the mangroves, was able to recover it, and that had panels that went down. It was a little bit better, but was always deflating because it was old and broken. Then I upgraded to a Zodiac. That was my first chance at a rib, and that thing worked wonderfully. That was a major step up. And now recently I've gone to this. So a lot of this gear I've kind of acquired and gone step by step as well. This is my full life. So if you think about $10,000 for a car, you'd be like, no problem. Now the dinghy itself, you can get a bit more use out of, more longevity if you put chaps on it. I'm not gonna put chaps on this because I wanna see how long it's gonna last. I know this Highfield is a high quality dinghy, and I know the Hypalon it's made out of is also a high quality material. So for me, it's a cool way for me to test it, and that's really what I do a lot. But for you at home, you guys looking to get the most out of this, the most bang for your buck, so you can be a cruiser like some of these boats out here, I'd recommend spending another couple $100 and making chaps for it yourself, or spending a little bit more than that and having somebody make them for you. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, you learned something, and I hope this will help you as you're putting together your own dinghy. Now I'll say it just one more time, I really recommend you guys watch my video where I go around this whole island of St. Martin, because I learned a lot of lessons along the way that are really important, and it shows you the capabilities of what a system like this can do, which again, if you're out here sailing and cruising, you don't want to have some crappy little dinghy that keeps you restricted to only within a mile of your sailboat. The fact that with just one tank, nothing extra, I could go 42 nautical miles, that's crazy. That's a lot of fun too. So I hope you guys like this video, hope you learned something. I hope you'll be able to integrate this into your own system, or it motivates you and makes it a little bit clearer for when you guys want to get out here and become a cruiser boat like some of these other ones out here on the horizon. Other than that, I'll catch you on the next adventure.